next big project on the van is a wind deflector for the roof rack and the solar panels. You'd be surprised how much turbulence is caused by having no deflector at the front. It costs you several miles per gallon, certainly up to 10% on an aerodynamic car. On a brick-shaped van, maybe several less percent, but it still makes a difference. So I'm going to be making one here, and then at the back behind the Max fan, I've actually got a flat piece of 1020 extrusion. So I'm going to be making a deflector for that as well. And I'll get up there and show you that in a minute. Well, I've gotten some ABS, 1/8 inch ABS, to construct it. I've looked online and they are a couple $100 to get a decent deflector. So I've got some 1/8 inch ABS here. It's textured on one side and smooth on the other. I got this 2x4 sheet for $39 on Amazon shipped, which is pretty hard to beat. And I'm going to be making some cardboard forms, which the box it came in is perfect to make some forms out of. And I'll be transferring it to this. And I've got a few pieces of aluminum angle and some flat stock lying around. So hoping to have a pretty good looking deflector here to close out my roof rack. So let's get started. I'm actually going to start with the rear deflector because it's much more simple, and I'm going to be doing or attempting to do a 4-foot long straight bend with just a heat gun. So if I'm going to mess up a piece, I'd rather it be the easy one. So I'm just going to cut out a simple square 6-inch tall piece and we'll go from there. The rear deflector is going to be really simple. I did 7 inches by, I think my width is 48.75, and then just under an inch for the top of the extrusion, and I'm going to clamp this between two pieces of wood and heat it up and bend it down just a couple of degrees past the angle I want it to rest against the van's top to preload it a little bit. Other than that, the wind load will keep it down. I'll show you it up on the van here in a few minutes. My first piece of ABS, it's just a simple 7-inch tall by 48-inch. I used a razor blade with a straight edge and scored it. Probably wouldn't recommend that method. It took probably 15 passes with the razor blade and then bending it to kind of flex it and break it the rest of the way. But at least that's one piece done for the moment. The next piece will be cut at a long bow to follow the contour of the roof. I'll show you that later. We will sand this and clean it up a little bit. Right now, I want to get a bend that's about 7/8 of an inch to cover the top of that extrusion, and then just bend it down at maybe a 30-degree angle or so. So we're going to get started trying to set up a jig so we can do that. Alright, this whole process is pretty cumbersome here. I've only got 2 bends to do, so I don't need to refine it much. Basically, I've got a piece of aluminum angle under here to keep a nice straight edge. I've got just under an inch that I'm going to be bending, and then I'm going to be just heating the leading edge of this, or rather the end of this angle, evenly all the way across the best I can, and try to bend it down. I will go up to the van and check the angle I want to bend to, and like I said, I'm going to bend a couple degrees past that angle just to put a little bit of preload on the bottom, and we'll see how this bend works out. Basically, this is the angle I'm looking for. The top of the roof's not perfectly flat there, but I don't have to do a bow the way I would up front, mostly for aesthetic reasons. So I'm going to duplicate this angle and just go maybe a couple degrees further, again, to put a little bit of preload on it. I found that to be pretty easy to work with for the bend. It's also pretty forgiving if you overheat a spot and get kind of a concave area. It's pretty easy to reform. I'm not really worried about aesthetics for this piece because it is completely hidden from view unless you're sitting on top of the van, which I don't plan to be. So I will be a little more discerning on the front one since that'll be visible, and when the sun hits even the textured side, if you can see in the video, it's shiny, so any distortions in it are going to be fairly visible. So it's the key is to take your time and heat it evenly all the way across the best you can. I was working kind of with halves a little bit at a time just because keeping it heated all the way across with a heat gun is pretty difficult for a 48-inch piece. So let this cool off for a minute. And then I'm going to go give it a test fit. And again, it'll just be bolting to the top of the extrusion. There are some corrugations in the roof, so I do plan to probably just cut a relief for the corrugations that this goes over so it'll meet the roof line a little bit better. Haven't decided if I'm going to do that yet or not, so we'll see how it fits first. So I've got these nuts that slide into the extrusions. They're really easy to install. And then I've got some really shallow, I just luckily had 5 really shallow aluminum Phillips countersunk screws lying around. So I'm going to countersink the holes, and I'm going to do 5 of these across the top and countersink into the 1/8 inch ABS. And then I've got some edge guard for the bottom, and that'll be about it for this rear piece. So I can get this thing drilled and we'll go up and install it. Alright, the edge guard is installed and that stuff fits snug, which is what you want. I've got the holes countersunk, and hopefully it won't be too much trouble getting this installed onto the extrusion, but that should be it for the rear deflector. Well, that's it. I've got the rear deflector installed. I'm really pleased with the angle, and the countersunk screws that I happened to have at the right length saved me a lot of time cutting some really short screws. They worked out nicely. The edge guard worked out nicely. It's a nice tight fit against the van body, but the corrugations give it a 1/8 of an inch or so of a gap at the bottom for water and nothing will collect in there. Should hold up really well. The ABS won't be bothered by the sun or really any of the conditions up here. As far as the hardware goes, we'll see. If it gives me any problems, I'll just replace it. Tomorrow I'll get started on the front deflector, which is going to be a lot more complicated. I may not do a bend at the top just based on how clean of a bend I'm able to get up here. But all in all, this will really cut down on some parasitic drag from turbulence coming off the back of the van. I just had a flat 1020 extrusion sticking up here, so wind coming off the panels is just all over the place. Ideally, I would have had a flat surface all the way across here and one more solar panel instead of a max fan, but I had to make a sacrifice for airflow. So anyway, that's where we are for today. Alright, I'm starting work on the front deflector. You can kind of see what I'm working with up here. I want to cover this whole gap, and because of the crown of the roof, I'm going to be cutting at a bit of an angle. I've just done a quick freehand cardboard template to kind of get a ballpark of where I want to be angle wise. It's actually a pretty good fit. It actually even fits the crown really well. Kind of lucked out there. I'm going to be doing some fillers on the sides as well. It should look pretty nice. Follows the contour of the roof pretty well. Be a lot less wind resistance. And again, you may not think it'll make a huge difference on a van like this, but you'd be surprised how much the turbulence can cost you with regards to fuel mileage, and also with wind catching you from passing 18-wheelers and things. It's nice to have a smoother transition here. So I'm going to do a little bit of trimming on this to kind of make sure I've got the fit I want before I transfer it to the ABS and cut it, and then we'll get started building the final product. Alright, as you can see up on the roof, I lucked out on my first ballpark cut on this, and it was perfect for the roof line, so I didn't really have to do any trimming. I cut off the edges to get the width. Actually transferred it twice on the ABS, because one way would require me to cut twice. I'm just going to do the cut with a jigsaw. It's not going to be an easy or quick cut that way, but it's the best thing I have for it, and I can cut it, leave some room to sand it and clean it up. To get this ballpark line, I just kind of did a real long arc with a pencil, and again, it just came out nicely. I had plenty of cardboard. This ABS for $39 or $36.99 on Amazon came with a big box. There was plenty of cardboard to do all of my forms, and enough ABS to leave me another 9-inch by 48-inch section that you will certainly see on another project in the future if you come back to the channel. I'm going to go ahead and get this cut and start getting it cleaned up, and then we can get the aluminum forms built. Alright, cut came out pretty clean with the jigsaw. As you can see in the video, I'm using a hacksaw blade on the jigsaw. It's a little too fine, so it melts, and then it melts itself back together behind the blade, so I had to do 2 passes and it makes it a little uglier. I'm going to go over this with a piece of sandpaper on a wood angle and clean it up, and then we'll be covering this with edge guard anyway, but it's still going to get sanded until it looks perfect, and we'll start building a metal frame. Alright, I've got this thing sanded down to a pretty good even arc. If you did a better cut with a slightly coarser tooth, you wouldn't have had to do that much sanding, but it only took me 15 minutes to clean it up. So my metal frame is pretty simple. I'm going to be using a piece of 3/4 inch aluminum angle to stiffen the back of this, and then I'm going to be using flat stock bent at an inside angle to mount it to the front of the solar panels, and then they're going to preload the front down against the roof line a little bit. So it'll be pretty simple. Just a little bit of cutting, and I've got some stainless button head Allen 1/4-20 bolts that I'm going to be using because I've got a lot left over, and I'm going to be making end caps that kind of cover up the angle that's left open on the side just to give it a nice finished look. So here we go, let's get started on the frame. Alright, I've made a couple of real simple brackets out of aluminum flat stock. These are going to mount to the front of the solar panel, and then it'll have 2 button head Allen black oxide stainless bolts going through, holding the deflector onto here. And then this piece of aluminum angle will add rigidity across the front of the deflector itself, and then another piece of flat stock underneath it will fill up the gap in between there. So I'm going to head back up to the van and take a couple of measurements to figure out exactly how high I want the top of the deflector to sit against the panels, and then we'll start drilling these guys and get them mounted. Alright, I'm now at the point where I've got a form made for the back. Again, it's real simple. The whole thing weighs probably 2 pounds, if that, maybe 1.5 pounds. This angle will be bolted into the front of the solar panels, which is fairly rigid, and I'll do a 1-inch washer on each side to give it some purchase. The end caps will fill in. This is 48 inches wide, and the actual measurement was closer to 50, so I'm going to do about a 1-inch bridge here, and then a 90-degree bend with a heat gun again, like I did on the aft panel. Then I'll fill this in with another piece of flat stock, and that'll just come out, fill up the opening nicely, and that's where we are. I'm going to go get another test fit and start getting some measurements for drilling into the front of the solar panel. Got the deflector pretty much finished up and ready to assemble. ABS doesn't always have the best UV resistance for a full sun application like this. I contacted the manufacturer, and this one is supposed to have a UV stabilizer added during the process, so it's supposed to hold up better. I still put a coat of Eastwood chassis black, some real UV stable paint on here to hopefully help out and keep it from degrading or chalking up or getting brittle. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble this. I painted it about an hour ago, so it's still not perfectly dry, but I don't really care about aesthetics here. So I'm going to get it put together and see if we can get it mounted up so I can start marking up the sides. This is pretty much it for the frame. It's real simple. Just got some flat stock and the aluminum angle on there. It's going to have 2 mounting points into the solar panel, and then the edge guard's going to ride on the body. I really don't think it'll need any more reinforcement. I've had plenty of roof racks that had deflectors on them with just cheap plastic because the downforce of the wind holds it in place. I've got black oxide stainless button head Allen bolts going through with matching washers to keep the nice black look going, and then when I make the end caps there will be 2 more screws spaced out there, probably 1.5 inches from each end. They'll be the same type, and after we close those corners out, that'll be it for the deflector. Hopefully the paint I added will aid in the UV stability and it'll last a long time. Other than that, it's very impact resistant, and I'm really happy with the rigidity and everything with 1/8 inch thick. Let's go ahead and see if we can get this thing installed. Pretty much got the deflector mounted up. It took longer than planned because the nuts are a real pain to get to, so I'm using about every wrench I've got. I'll hopefully only have to do this once, so I'm not going to get to the end caps today, but basically they're going to come out 1 inch to meet up with the edge of this extrusion. You can also get a better look at the rack up here and the rear deflector. Notice my solar panels are a little dirty, so I'm going to clean them when I'm done. But all in all, this rack was only a few $100, and it is really, really solid, and I think it looks great. Anyway, we'll get back to these end caps tomorrow. Got the deflector mounted up last night, and this morning when I came out, it had expanded quite a bit from the heat. So ABS does expand quite a lot, and I hadn't accounted for that here, so you can see the bowing, which doesn't affect it operationally at all, but it looks pretty unsightly from the front. So I'm going to take a piece of VHB 3M VHB tape and run it down the piece of aluminum flat stock under here. That'll hold it still from the from that point, and that should keep it from bowing up. It's really good tape, and the back side of this is smooth, so it should adhere really well. There are some other things you could do, but I think that's a quick fix that should hold it. We'll find out. I've got the VHB tape on the deflector, and it's working well to keep it from bowing. So I'm starting to make the end caps. They're going to be pretty simple, but they need to cover about an inch gap. I could only get 48-inch wide ABS for a reasonable price. So it's 50 inches wide with what I needed. So these are going to overhang by an inch and then overlap and screw to the sides of the deflector. So I've got my basic angle right here. I'm just going to kind of cut it off and go up there and see what I need to do. We've got a basic form for the end caps. The two sides aren't identical, so I'll probably have to modify the other side a bit, but it's very simple. I'm going to transfer this to some ABS and then do as clean of a 90-degree bend as I can. I did learn from the other one that using aluminum as a straight edge saps some of the heat out of your heat gun and makes it difficult to get a tight radius around the aluminum, so I'll be using wood on both sides. It's a little harder on a 48-inch piece to have a straight edge, at least for the scrap I've got lying around. So, get this transferred. So this is our end cap. It's just going to have, again, 2 bolts coming down from the top holding it on the side. I'll probably do a tiny bit of cleanup here, but it turned out really nicely. I got a really tight 90-degree bend with a couple of clamps, and wood worked a lot better because it doesn't sap the heat away. It's not as good of a conductor as the aluminum. So clean this up and see how it looks. While this one's cooling, this side turned out really nicely. It fits really well, but it's got a little bit more of a shine than I like. It doesn't match the aluminum angle that it's butting up against, so it's just kind of glitters in the sun. I don't like it, so I'm just going to take a red Scotch-Brite and lightly dull this down a little bit. I could, of course, paint it as well. An option for later, but I think I can get rid of a good bit of the sheen this way and get the look I'm going for. I don't know how well you'll be able to tell on camera, but so just a little bit of work with the Scotch-Brite dulls that down. Doesn't have that same kind of glittery look to it in the sun. It's only an issue on the sides of the deflector because the way the sun hits them. The sun hitting them up top with it 10 feet up on a van, not a problem at all. So just the side here. It's turned out great. The workability of the ABS is really incredible. I mean, that's a really nice line. Downsides I've found so far are some, depending on the manufacturer, limited UV exposure recommended, and it definitely expands and contracts a lot. So depending on your other items you're working with or what you're attaching it to, that may be you may need a free-floating design or a different material. but it sure is workable. Aside from the double-sided tape, I'm doing one more thing to help with the expansion of the ABS. I'm going to make these holes more of a slot, and then I'll be using Loctite and lock washers and not tightening these too tightly so it'll allow them to walk, kind of like vinyl siding does, where it'll be allowed to expand and contract just a little bit, and that'll help keep it from bowing. So hopefully between the double-sided tape and that, it'll stop having bows that are visible from the front. So that's where we are. Well, this is the finished product. Turned out great. It's a little dusty, but you can see the sides here. The end caps turned out really nicely. They were a bit of a bear to get the nuts and stuff on. Actually had to super glue the nut to the end of my finger. I couldn't get any tools under there. But looks really good. Got the rear deflector. Should be a lot less drag up here.